These are illusionary and psychological, and part of the cultural conditioning, to make you think that you need something when you really don't need it. And oftentimes it is related to bodily things, and so this is culturally programmed habits, and these can become addictions. It's related to consumerism, certain food, sex, ego, and so on. These are perceived to be needs when they're really not needs, and they're mostly culturally programmed. So many of these habits and perceived needs hinder the autonomy of the will and trap the mind. So when a consumer-based materialist society and culture places little value on the development of subjective mind and spirit, the individual develops in a lopsided fashion, living for sensual stimulations of the body rather than strengthening the autonomy of the will and exploring the innermost depths of mind and spirit. So, and then this also affects the way you relate to your immediate environment. It becomes something that you merely use or exploit. So, and otherwise, if you can't use it or exploit it, then it's just dead. Nature is dead, just like the artificial world that you live in. Nature is just no different than your artificial world. It's just a collection of dead, useless things. And other species are there just for you to kill so that you can eat them. But without really much consideration that these species also have a consciousness. Now, maybe it's not the same as your consciousness, but they do have some form of consciousness. And some of the higher animals are able to feel. It's been proven that animals can feel, especially if you domesticate animals. You can if you had any kind of. That's why people like dogs and cats, because they realize that the dogs and cats are almost like children to them, and they have feelings. So they are capable, but oftentimes we overlook that, because of cultural programming. So what is the solution? The solution to the mind-body problem, though, and what some people will maybe jump to quickly. Well, you have to withdraw from this world. This world's completely illusionary. It's completely false. It's evil. And the only way that you have to regain that subjectivity is that you just disengage from the world. But this is really not a solution, because it leads to the alienated, otherworldly, disengaged ego with no active presence in the world and no relation to others. So that's not really a solution. It's not going to help. Instead, the integrally informed individual reestablishes the subjectivity of the mind and the autonomy of will, but at the same time lives fully and authentically in this world with active integrity and harmony in relation to oneself, others, and the immediate environment. And also resist culturally conditioned, psychologically driven addictions of the consumer-based materialist civilization. To become a living example of the inner revolution, the foundation for authentic social transformation and global sustainable development. That's where it has to start with each individual. Now, that's the individual though, but we also have to consider societal relations as well. And that's the next level, where society meaning like the national, regional culture in relationship to other societies. In other words, whatever group or culture you affiliate yourself with, that's your society. And then, of course, there are other groups, other people, right? Nations, cultures, and then you have your national environment, the ecosystems, agriculture, industry, cities. Okay, so now the question is, if we say that it begins with every individual, how can an inner revolution be sparked globally? This is the big question, right? How is that possible? Is it possible? Will humanity be able, if we say it's a matter of evolution, well, you can't. There's no shortcuts to evolution. Evolution has its own timetable. Nature has its own timetable. Will humanity evolve then in time to meet the challenge of the future, to be able to solve the global problem? It's another question. So, well, first of all, before we can answer these complicated questions, I'm not sure that I can give you a complete answer to that. But sure, first of all, we should consider, what is society? If not the accumulation of individual relations expressed through collective affiliations. So, which produces culture at the same time as it is profoundly affected by culture. So if we say that the society and culture has a profound influence on the individual, then perhaps this transformation of individual consciousness can be sparked globally through a transformation of cultural values. So once we begin the culture, and of course a lot of this has to do with education, I think, but once we begin to realize that there's this need and the culture begins to change, then the individual can also begin to change and accept that kind of positive cultural programming, you might say. So new values that support a sustainable lifestyle represent this lever of necessity to propel social change. So the goal of sustainability, that is, as an ideal by itself, is not really powerful enough image to spark an inner revolution globally. We need more. It needs more positive content, in other words. And first of all, too, it needs to have some element of critique. I would say civilizational critique. To confront, challenge, critique, and deconstruct the ideology of unlimited economic growth. Otherwise, the pursuit of sustainability is futile. We have to first do that, deconstruct this ideology. And then, at the same time, though, it's not just a matter of deconstructing. If you take away something, you've got to have something of value to replace it with. So you need a more stimulating, engaging, and fulfilling ideology of well-being that must be powerful enough, that is, with enough qualitative, positive content to spark an inner transformation on a global scale. So this leads us to the question, well, what does the good life and the path to happiness actually mean? And what is that, in other words? And we know what we've been told by our culture, but we find out that it's very empty. And in fact, first thing off, we have to recognize that the good life and happiness is not something that you pursue. It's not something that you have to strive for. It's not this elusive goal. It's actually your natural condition. It's who you are if you just let yourself be. It's natural. It's not something you have to strive for. But the problem is, we need to understand the conditions that produce unhappiness and misery. That's what we need to tackle. Once we understand that and we remove those, then our natural state will naturally be happy people, you know. The modern image of the future has crystallized into the technological society. I read the book, probably many of you have read Fred Pollock's Image of the Future. It's a classic in future study. But Pollock never really says exactly what the modern image of the future is in the book. And it seems to be that it's kind of fractured. It's always been kind of fractured, at least in modernity. And it is really a modern thing, I think. Then when I read Jacques Ellul's Technological Society, I realized, it dawned on me, I had this sort of aha moment, where I realized this is the image of the future. The modern image of the future is the technological society. That's what it is. Pollock didn't say it, but that's what it is. And Jacques Ellul didn't refer to the image of the future, but the two are obviously, to me, we're both in agreement. They both connected to each other. And the problem is that humans become so conditioned, dependent, and emasculated by technical civilization that they just give up all control over their own future. They also give up their own nature, their own consciousness, their spirituality, culture, and evolution to be redefined, remade in the image of the machine. And that's a big problem, the modern civilization. So how can we account for the clash of societal relations resulting in exploitation, abuse, conflict, murder, and war? If we believe that it has to do with what you believe. If you believe that the purpose of life is to possess and acquire more things, consume more goods, amuse ourselves endlessly, then these narcissistic, sensate desires are projected collectively into conflicting societal relations and a consumerist, materialist ethic and culture, which in turn amplify these manufactured needs through their advertising mouth organs as the way to happiness. And that's why we have these problems. So what effect does the worship of technology for technology's sake, integrated into a perpetual global war economy and associated with materialism, consumerism, and the commodification of mass culture as the measure of well-being and good life, what does that have on individual? What effect does it have on individual and societal relations? Well, for one thing, it desensitizes and flattens human nature such that it becomes conditioned to regard and treat all things, all of nature, all others as objects. That's the big problem. As a means for one's ends, and at the same time as means within the service of the capitalist system, the technological society, and industrial civilization. So within this system of relations in perpetual conflict and war, modern society and civilization is inherently strained, stressed, and conflicted. And this pathological, it becomes a kind of pathology, really, perspective on well-being in the good life becomes increasingly unstable and unsustainable, and hence unstable. And that brings me to the planetary relations. I think I'm going to have to stop here and let Professor Park take over. But just one thing I want to point out about this section as well. I won't be able to go over it in the paper like it is in the paper, but I put humans as the fire of global technological industrial civilization, and then we have the air, water, and earth as a separate category. You know, fire, the whole imagery, the metaphor of fire is so important in human evolution. And I also got this idea, I have to admit, from the movie Avatar. If you saw it, you know what I'm talking about. So, fire, but what's happened is these other elements, air, water, and earth, are under threat. They're being threatened because the fire civilization is too strong. It's too much, and it's destroying the others. And what the fire civilization doesn't realize, though, is destroying itself at the same time, because it needs these others, you know, and also other species and life forms. Okay, thank you. And let Professor Park take over. You can use this now.
My, my,
Where is your